work at a Montessori school, which is basically a very small school with 3 to 4 tiny classrooms for children. The classrooms are located on the lower level of a church. My job is to clean these classrooms every night after classes end. Usually it takes me about 2 hours to clean all the rooms, but since I also work the closing shift at a nearby grocery store, I don't get to the school until around 10:30 p.m. most nights. It's worth mentioning that the church shares a parking lot with an old folks' home directly across from it. Over the time I've worked here, a lot of weird and creepy things have happened, but nothing compares to what happened just a couple of weeks ago. I had just finished cleaning the second room and was moving my supplies to the third. It was around 11:45 p.m., meaning I was running a little behind, so I was trying to rush. As I crossed the hallway to the third room, I suddenly heard loud bells echoing through the church upstairs. Someone had rung the doorbell. Nobody had ever shown up during my shifts before. It was always so late, and both the school and the church had been closed for hours. Nervously, I made my way up the stairs and toward the door. The door was one of those heavy wooden ones with large tinted glass windows. Trying not to be seen, I peeked around the corner to see who was outside. I saw an old woman, probably in her 70s or 80s, just standing there right outside the door. Quickly, I backed away before she could notice me. I figured she must have wandered off from the old folks' home, and that one of their attendants would soon come to get her. So, I decided to ignore it and went back to cleaning, mopping the floors of the room. But only a few minutes later, I heard banging echoing through the halls. I jumped at the sound and stopped to listen. The banging stopped for a moment before I heard the old woman yelling from outside. I couldn't quite make out what she was saying, so I cautiously made my way back upstairs to hear more clearly. She was calling for someone named Abby. She just kept repeating the name over and over. As I got closer to the door, the yelling stopped. I looked out the window, but she was no longer there. Feeling uneasy, I reassured myself that someone had likely come and taken her back to the home. Turning around to go back downstairs, I caught something in the corner of my eye. The old woman was staring directly at me through the window beside the staircase. Her wide, unblinking eyes locked onto mine as she screamed, "Abby, help me!" Her hair was long and gray, disheveled, and her face looked wrong. I bolted downstairs, locking myself in one of the classrooms. Shaking, I called the old folks' home and explained the situation, asking if she might have wandered away from them. The woman on the phone assured me that everyone was accounted for. She said they would have noticed if someone had left, as they were required to check residents in and out. She promised to double check and told me to stay on the line. While I waited, the banging began again, this time coming from a window upstairs. My heart raced as I told the woman on the line what was happening. She asked me to describe the old lady's appearance, and I nervously relayed the details. There was silence on the other end before the woman finally said, "Stay away from her. Do not open the door. Find somewhere safe and wait for help." Her words made my fear skyrocket. I stayed hidden in the classroom, gripping my phone tightly. The banging continued upstairs, louder and more frantic. I feared the old windows wouldn't hold much longer. Finally, I heard male voices from outside. After a short struggle, the banging stopped, and everything went quiet. I sat there for a while, trembling, before finishing the rest of the cleaning. I never learned who Abby was or why the old lady was so desperate to get into the church. But knowing she's still in the building across the parking lot fills me with dread. I'm just grateful I never opened the door. I used to work the register at a local gas station, mostly on the night shift. While I've left the job now, there were many strange incidents during my time there, but one event in particular still haunts me to this day. I worked overnight shifts a few days a week, usually on Fridays and Saturdays. Most of my shifts were dull, a battle to stay awake as I stocked shelves and helped the occasional customer. The store attracted a mix of drunk people, road-tripping families, or groups of friends, but it was usually pretty quiet. On this particular night, it was around 2 a.m. I hadn't seen a customer in over an hour and was starting to nod off at the counter. The desk was tucked around the corner from the entrance, with a bell on the door to alert me when someone came in. I woke up suddenly as the bell rang. A man walked in, a regular-looking guy in his 30s. He browsed the shelves casually, looking at almost everything but not picking anything up. Something about his aimless wandering felt off. Curious, I glanced out the window to see if he was fueling up his car, but the lot was empty. After a few minutes, he looked at me, said, "Thanks," and left. The whole encounter was strange, but I dismissed it, thinking maybe he'd stolen something small. To stay awake, I grabbed a cart to restock items. While I was working, I suddenly noticed a man standing at the end of the aisle. He startled me. I hadn't heard the doorbell ring. This man was wearing a large hoodie and dark clothes. Something about him felt wrong. Then, it hit me. It was the same guy from earlier, but he had changed clothes. My stomach dropped as I realized he might have been scoping the place out earlier. My heart pounded as I rushed back to the counter. Trying to stay calm, I said, "Welcome back, sir. Need help finding anything?" He didn't reply but locked eyes with me, his expression blank yet unsettling. Slowly, he approached the counter and pulled a small handgun from his hoodie pocket. I froze in terror as he placed a pack of gum on the counter and said, "Just this." Confused and panicked, I scanned the gum with trembling hands. He pulled out $1, tossed it on the counter, said, "Thanks," and walked out. For a few moments, I just stood there, shaking. I couldn't wrap my head around what had just happened. Was he trying to intimidate me? Rob me? Why only buy gum? I reported the incident to the police and called my manager, but nothing ever came of it. The whole situation was bizarre, and I still don't know what his true intentions were. I work as a cybersecurity analyst for a large office company in my town. It was my first job in the field, so naturally I had to take the shift that nobody else wanted, the overnight shift. Surprisingly, working overnight wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be. It was actually pretty peaceful. My job mostly consisted of reviewing log files to ensure nothing suspicious occurred while the rest of the staff was asleep. This meant that I was entirely alone in the office building for several hours each night. The silence, while calming, could also be unsettling. I'd often fall asleep, as staring at a screen for hours in the middle of the night was hard on my eyes. To avoid sleeping through my entire shift, I started setting soft alarms on my phone to wake me every hour. By the time this happened, I had been working this job for about 4 months. It was a regular night, and my coworker had just finished his shift at midnight and left the building. A few minutes later, I got up, started the coffee machine, and walked down the main hallway to check that no one else was still in the building. This routine gave me peace of mind and made the empty office feel a little less eerie. I returned to my desk, placed my phone next to my keyboard, and turned on the alarms. I continued working, reviewing logs and monitoring the system. About 20 minutes later, I realized I hadn't heard the coffee machine beep to signal that it was done. I got up to check on it and found that the coffee pot was empty. Oddly enough, the coffee machine was turned off. At first, I thought it might have been a glitch or that I had forgotten to turn it on properly. I brushed it off, restarted the machine, and went back to my desk. When I sat down, I immediately noticed that my phone wasn't where I had left it, right next to my keyboard. I patted my pockets, but it wasn't there either. Confused, I retraced my steps back to the coffee station, but the phone wasn't there either. I replayed the moments in my head, and I was certain that I had placed the phone on my desk. That's when the uneasiness began to settle in. I glanced around the room. The way the desks were arranged meant that mine was in the center of a large, open space, surrounded by other desks and computers. Standing there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I called out nervously, "Hello? Is someone there?" I really hoped it was just my coworker playing some dumb prank on me. My voice echoed through the empty office, but there was no response. Then I heard it. A soft shuffling noise coming from behind a desk in the far corner of the room. My heart raced as I turned to look in the direction of the sound. Almost immediately after, my phone alarm went off. But the sound wasn't coming from where I had left my phone. It was coming from the opposite corner of the room. Panic overtook me as I realized what this meant. There had to be two people in the office with me, one by the desk and one by the phone. Without thinking twice, I bolted for the exit. As I ran, I expected to hear footsteps chasing me, but the building remained eerily silent. Still, I didn't slow down. I made it out of the office and ran across the street to a gas station, where I used their phone to call 911. I explained to the dispatcher that there were unknown intruders in my office building. The police arrived quicker than I anticipated. They searched the building and within minutes brought out a man in handcuffs. I didn't recognize him, but they also retrieved my phone, which had been hidden behind some boxes in the corner of the office. The man was carrying a small knife in his pocket, which made the situation even more terrifying in hindsight. The next day, we learned more about what had happened. The man was a former employee who had been fired shortly before I started working there. According to the police, he admitted that he had intended to scare me out of the building so he could retrieve his company-issued laptop. He claimed he wanted access to some information on it, though his explanation sounded strange and didn't sit well with me. My coworkers later confirmed that they remembered the man and described him as a little off. Whether his explanation was genuine or not, I'm just glad I trusted my instincts and got out when I did. If I had stayed and confronted him, there's no telling how things could have escalated.